Hello, everyone. So for those of you that I'm yet to meet, I'm Lizzie and I'm co-founder of Kindaba, the private communication tool for your family. And I'm the host of FamTech Summit. And I'm really excited today because we've got an amazing community of siblings, cousins, grandparents, parents, aunts and uncles who are just interested in learning more about family and technology. And I'm really glad that you've dialed in to join us. So today I am here to introduce our next speaker, Zarja. Thank you so much for joining us, Zarja. You're a star. And Zarja is founder of My Tamarin, and they're an AI-powered childcare matchmaker. Essentially, they're building a modern village for modern parents. And Zarja, I know you're going to really get stuck into that and explain what does that mean and explore that with us and our community today. So I'm gonna pass over to you just to introduce yourself a wee bit more, and then we'll start with our first topic of discussion. So over to you.
All right, well, super. Thanks so much for having me, Lizzie. It's really exciting to be part of your community too, because I know you're building this community for, like you say, parents, grandparents, cousins, aunts, and look, this is where the modern village comes in. You know, there's this old saying that says it takes a village to raise a child, and I didn't quite appreciate that until I have my first. But now I totally understand the value of that. The value of help, the value of having family around. But that's so hard nowadays because our families live so far away from us because of our global lifestyles. And that's why at My Tamarin, we're building a modern village for modern parents.
That's great. So I'm really excited to chat to you today, both as a mum and also as a business owner. And I would love to just jump right in with our first order of discussion, which was your experience of maternity leave and how you found that.
Yeah, so it was different than expected. And to be entirely honest, it was hard. You know, when I was pregnant, everyone was saying, oh my God, you know, this is going to be amazing. You're going to be at home with your baby and you're going to be able to have coffees with your girlfriends and it's going to be amazing. You will not have to work and, you know, life will be great. And then it happened and we got this amazing baby, but it was nothing like that. It was really, really hard. And on top of that, I felt very guilty about not fully enjoying. And I, you know, for the entire time of my maternity leave, I was constantly thinking, what is wrong with me? That I'm not feeling that enjoyment and that pleasure and that excitement and you know, all the positivity that people were talking about. And it wasn't until after I went back to work that I realized what was missing or what was wrong. And it was ultimately the work that made me happy and whole and balanced again.
Right. So that's really interesting, you kind of explaining your perception of what it might be like and then the actuality of that experience for you. How do you find, you talked about the guilt, talk to me a little bit more about that. How else did the guilt manifest? What did the guilt stop you from doing, or what did you really have to work through to make sure that you got past that?
Yeah, so that's the guilt question is really at the center of my experience, but also at the center of a lot of other moms' experiences, especially when it comes to help with your baby, help with your children, help with your family. So in hindsight, I realized that I didn't have enough help, and that was in part because I was too shy and too embarrassed and too proud to ask for help. I had this idea in my mind that, like my mom, I'm going to be able to do it without any paid help. Right. And you know, here it's the key difference between how I perceived help and how my mom perceived help. I specifically said paid help because that's the only, you know, sort of form of help that I could have, given that my parents are so far away. But the reality is our parents all had help because they had grandparents and aunts and uncles around. They just didn't call them paid help, right? So no one has ever raised a child without help, except for that they weren't paying for it. Nowadays, we have to pay for it. And I think that makes a lot of mom guilty. And I have lots of friends who are hiding the fact that they had help early on because they felt ashamed. And it's a real shame that people feel that way, because it's only with help, I think, that we can be better parents, which is ultimately what benefits our children.
Right, and that's interesting to hear that in terms of your experience of upbringing, but also distance from your family. Do you think that also affects people, whether it is paid help or whether it's just actually the fact that I would have to ask my parents to look after my child? Even that is potentially now, is that still a barrier?
Potentially. And I think it's easier to ask your parents than your in-laws.
Right.
Most likely, or for most people. But I think it's still, when my mom was there and she was able to be there with me for a short period of time, it wasn't a problem. It's just that also my mom, equally like me, needed to sleep. So I was there, awake during the night, feeding the baby, and then I felt during the day I needed to be, social, and be with my family. And so I never slept, and that just led to one long, very long sleep deprived period.
Right. So I guess let's jump into that now, because you've mentioned it. Like, what does the experience of that broken sleep, that deprivation of sleep, have for, in your experience, you as parents and wider family, but also for your children?
Yeah, so Lizzie, I had this quite horrifying experience when my first baby was 5 months old. I remember we were returning from a swim class, and I was driving a car and he was at the back of the car. And I had this moment where a moment later I realized that the car has just passed right in front of me and I had no idea that that car was there. So we missed the car crash by probably millimeters. And how is this possible? This has never happened to me. I'm quite a careful driver. But it felt like as if I was drunk, when you're a little dizzy and like you're a little slower. And so that encouraged me to do a bit more research into sleep and sleep deprivation. And basically the research confirms that without sleep, we are as if we were drunk. So basically 2 nights in a row with sleep of less than 6 hours, and your mind is operating at the same level as if you were legally drunk. By legally drunk, I mean the level at which you should not be driving. Right. So that effectively means that most of moms with newborn babies are walking around, operating and looking after their babies drunk. and when I realized that this shouldn't be, it's not safe for the babies, and of course it's not enjoyable for the parents. And it was during that time that I realized that there is this type of help called a night nanny, okay, a maternity nurse that can help parents during the nights. And while it is perceived as a bit more of a luxurious type of help, I think it's the best investment one could make in the early days. And it's not just for parents, it's also important for children, because especially for young babies, sleep is the most important part of their brain development. Mm. So we feel that we are doing babies a favor if they're waking up and feeding them during the night, but actually we should be teaching them how to sleep.
So building on your experience of that really shocking realization about sleep, and then your research on top of that, but also your feeling of initially of guilt and asking for help, how did your perceptions of those things change when you did return to work?
So when I went back to work, I felt less guilty about help. In fact, I knew that the only way to come back to work was by employing full-time help. So we had since then a full-time nanny. But I didn't feel guilty about it, because it's like, okay, I need that, because otherwise I can't go back to work and earn my salary. But with this knowledge, with this experience now, I see that I am, at least, the best parent where I have the balance of work and life. We talk a lot about how we work too much and we need more time for life to balance it out. For me, I almost had at that time too much life and I needed work to balance it out.
It's refreshing to hear. So did you have a moment where you thought, oh my goodness, that is my truth, that I have too much life and not enough work? I find that really fascinating, the work-life balance as a notion. Do we ever have balance? Is working 5 days and lifing for 2 days a balance? Or in your case, was lifing for 7 days a week actually a balance because you didn't have any work? So what is your perception of that, if it's balance or if it's work-life integration, or what was that right ratio for you?
Yeah, so one thing that was really interesting for me, or my evolution as a work-life balancer, was that I struggled a lot with that balance before I had children. And I really thought that once I'm going to have children, it's going to be even worse. But interestingly, Lizzie, it was my children that helped me balance everything out.
Right.
Because they helped me put some boundaries around my work. You know, I told you I had a full-time nanny, but I had to be home by 7 because by then she would leave. So there was no room for me to just stay at work and keep going.
Yeah.
So I've learned how to pack everything efficiently in that time that I had, then come back, you know, be with my baby and now 2. And then if needed, I can always jump back to work. But for me, really, it was then that I had children that I felt like I gained balance in work life.
So talk to me a little bit more about that. I feel like as human beings, and certainly as parents, we struggle a lot or wrestle a lot with the idea of should. I should be spending more time doing this. I should be feeding my child that. I should do X, Y, and Z. And that list of shoulds and that, whether it comes internally or whether that is an external pressure. How would you speak to parents who hear you saying, I need to put boundaries in place, and they list it as another should? What is something to kind of help them break down that barrier of, this isn't something that I'm telling you you have to do. This is something that I say in my experience, it helped. How did you kind of start that?
Well, first of all, I think I have tried to remove from my mind and my ideals what other people have put in place as, you know, the work-life balance, or, you know, whatever people defined as having it all. By the way, I think that these type of expressions like work-life balance or having it all put a lot of pressure, unnecessary pressure on people. The reality is no one can have it all.
Yeah.
No, it's not just working mothers that can have it all. No one can have it all. So to me, it's more about like a constant balancing act.
Mm.
And my needs, as well as the needs of my family, as well as the needs of my work, change over time.
Right.
And sometimes on a daily basis. And I'm happy to accept that. And all I try to do is I try to be flexible and be able to adjust both my work expectation as well as my family expectations, and just try to do my best every day.
So can you tell me a time when maybe it's gone either way, a time where you feel like, yeah, I have been able to be flexible and I've given myself that break or that chance to recognize that I can't always control what was going to happen today, or a time when actually it's just not worked the way that you wanted it to work and that's really affected you?
Well, so interestingly, we have this perception that once you start working for yourself, you're going to have more flexibility, more freedom. So I used to work as a management consultant for the Boston Consulting Group. So it's quite a demanding job. Oftentimes, you know, you travel. And so when I told people that I was going to leave and start this new company called My Tamarind, they said, oh, great, you're going to finally have enough time for your children and for your family. And you're going to be able to attend school plays without guilt. And the reality, Lizzie, is that, and you'll know that as a founder, that having your own company, building your own company from scratch, it's like having another baby. It's another 24/7 job. And it's actually harder work than it was before. Being your own boss, sometimes, you know, it's harder because the expectations are quite hard, and more importantly, there's no one else you can blame if things go wrong. So perhaps that has been the biggest surprise in my sort of journey of work-life balance, that actually building your own business, being your own boss, it's harder than working for someone else.
Yeah, I can appreciate that for sure. And something that you just said there really struck me about if you own your own business or you have a role that's really all-encompassing, then that can really be as if you have another child. And your experience was that you started My Tamarind during your second pregnancy, right? Your maternity leave. So how on earth did that, how did you fit that in? How did the inspiration come? How did you feel like you had the scope to be able to do that?
Yeah, so look, it's all started with frustration, which is often the case for businesses or startups in particular. Um, so, I talk a lot about guilt of help and shame of help earlier, and the reality is that I wasn't able to overcome it even the second time around. So although the second time around we had some help, I strongly believe that I didn't need any help during the night, for example. My husband was telling me, come on, let's do it. Don't be proud. But I kept going on my own until I got really sick about 5 weeks in, and I couldn't really cope anymore. And I needed someone to come help me that night. And, there was no place online that I could go and find a trusted person with experience in my area that could come help me. I was able to book a flight to New York for that night, or to book a restaurant in London if I wanted to. I could even book a massage for someone to come and give me a massage in my own home. But there's no modern online solution to find childcare. And so it started. I realized that this was really missing on the market as a whole, and that overall the childcare market is very dated, very archaic, and very technology starved. So really not catering to modern parents as well as modern nannies. And as I was doing more and more research, I realized that one, I was not the only one struggling with finding childcare, and that it went way beyond just sort of the online solution. So the second and perhaps more important insight that I've had was that finding a nanny, it's like finding your romantic partner, much more like finding your next corporate employee. Because when you're looking for a nanny, you're basically looking to create another very personal and intimate relationship. You're going to let someone into your home. You're going to let someone help you raise your children. So you by definition, you have to connect at a very personal level. There has to be compatibility in parenting style and family values. And no one on the market was looking at creating this relationship like that. And so sort of these two insights ultimately led me to quitting my job at BCG and starting my Tamarind.
What were those conversations like, or the point where you were weighing up, should I, shouldn't I? Like, what pushed you over the edge? Was it partially that the frustration was so high, and was it a belief that you could make a difference?
Yeah, so look, it took me almost about a year to make the final decision, because I really liked the job that I had before. But the more I was researching, and the more I actually then I started matching nannies and parents as a hobby. The more I saw that there was a massive need on the market, that there was this big opportunity. And the more I was working on it, the more it started feeling like a problem that I had to fix.
Right.
So I'm a problem solver by nature. I do this my entire life, and I optimize. And it's like, okay, this is the problem that I need to solve over the next 5 to 10 years.
Okay, so once you had made that decision and you realized that, hey, this, whether I own the problem or the problem owns me, like I'm the person, we're matched at the end. Where did your inspiration for the name come from, My Tamarind?
Yeah, so look, the modern village for modern parents is what I wanted this company to be. And so tamarinds are monkeys who parent in family groups, right, to help each other out while babies are small. So they take the burden off of mom, who is typically most burdened with the needs of the baby, and help her. And it's like, how amazing is that? I said, okay, that should be part of our name, and that's how My Tamarind.
That's fascinating, and I love that you've gone that additional mile from starting out as a hobby, matching people. You've really had that insight that there's something about really truly connecting with someone in terms of your family values, your parenting styles, that is much more akin to actually matching with a romantic partner. That's absolutely fascinating. So what is your top tip for parents when they're trying to look for the right nanny or paid help in the home, what are the do's and don'ts that you suggest to them?
Yeah, so it's a really good question, and it's very important, especially for parents who are recruiting a nanny for the first time, because the reality is the first-time parent or a person who is recruiting a nanny for the first time is a very inexperienced recruiter, even if they recruited before. So let me just give you an example from my own recruitment. When I was recruiting for my nanny, I was looking for CVs that would be exactly like the CVs for my associates at BCG.
Right.
It meant if a nanny had a spelling mistake in her CV, she was out.
Yeah.
But then I realized I was left with obsessive compulsive nannies who should never be nannies, because you cannot be obsessive compulsive if you're working with children. You know, you have to be comfortable getting dirty and getting on the floor with them and in the playground and the sand pit. And so a lot of other parents fall into similar traps. They simply don't see what are the right criteria for a nanny. And here's what I would suggest. Instead of getting hung upon what we call objective criteria, which is the number of years of experience or specific diplomas or specific languages, you first look for that personal connection, chemistry. That's why it's a little bit like dating. Can you see like being around this person? Can you, would you like your child to be around that person? Do you get along with them? Can you communicate with them? The communication is incredibly important. See, some parents are very good at being sort of directive and bossy, bossy in a good way. And some nannies are very happy to receive information and direction like this, whereas some other parents are much more intuitive and they want intuitive nannies. I don't need to tell you what you need to do, just figure it out and observe, right? And so that's sort of the type of personality matching that we do at My Tamarind. And perhaps the most important starting point is just to be sort of open-minded and don't get stuck with like one idea of a perfect nanny, especially if that perfect nanny idea comes from your friend. Because, unlike your husband, who is good for you but not for your friend, the nanny of your friend may be good for your friend, but not for you.
Yeah, that's really insightful. Especially, of course, you would fall back to previous habits of if you have recruited before in a work setting, probably is the kind of skills that you would lean back on. So what a good challenge to think of it more and actually, what kind of person do I want to be spending time with my child, and how would they necessarily look on paper, which isn't what you'd expect.
Exactly.
So I want to circle back around to kind of where we started and explore a little bit more about maybe the gender implications and your experience of, you've mentioned the shame and the guilt when it comes to either working or not working, or looking for help and not looking for help. And I wonder if you could just explore a little bit more about that in terms of where you felt that pain point the most and ways that you overcame that.
Yeah, so I think men are actually much better reaching out for help than women. I'm not sure why that is. Maybe because the way the society has been from the dawn of time, and women have looked after children and men have not. And then when men have to take over this role, they're like, okay, I need help. And that's sort of accepted. Whatever the reason, I think they don't have to. They don't have as much guilt or shame in asking for help, which is great. But the reality is that still the majority of childcare falls on women, which we see especially when women come back to work or don't. If a parent is going to choose to stay at home, it's typically going to be a mom, not a dad. But you see, when I was starting My Tamarind, I did a lot of research on gender and gender implications and how childcare affects women going back. And we know that 15% of women will not come back to work. And what we also know is that 20% of those women don't come because they are not able to find the right childcare that they would feel comfortable with. And that was part of the inspiration for My Tamarind as well. I said, everyone who wants childcare, who needs childcare, should get the right childcare for them. And especially, women who want to go back to work should have that right nanny or nursery for them. And that's how we try to help parents on a daily basis. Like, our ultimate goal is to find the right nanny for each family so that they can comfortably balance career and life.
Right. And can you tell me a couple of success stories in terms of people who have really found their right match, and that's been a good thing, of course, for the children, but also for them as parents, whether that's the freedom to return to work or whatever else they were focusing on?
Yeah, look, I mean, that's one of the pleasures and the heights of our work, when parents come back to us and it's like, oh my God, you know, like, you really saved my life. Sometimes they say, especially moms, you know, sometimes they call us crying with, you know, you hear the baby crying, but then you also hear the mom crying because they're struggling so much in those early weeks, early months sometimes. But they feel either uncomfortable or, you know, otherwise have not reached out for help before. But when we then send them the right nanny that they can relax with, that they can, you know, sleep while the nanny is with their baby, I think that really restores their balance and belief in that everything is actually going to be fine.
Right, I can definitely appreciate that. So thank you so much for your time in sharing that with our community and our audience. I would love to give you the opportunity just to share how people can find out more about My Tamarin and reach out to you if they have any further questions for you.
Okay, absolutely. Well, thank you. First of all, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for hosting us. So for all the parents who are looking for any help with children, but specifically nannies or maternity nurses or night nannies, they can find us on mytamarin.com. We have two ways of serving parents. We have our concierge service, which basically means we do the work end to end for you. And then we have also recently launched a very exciting AI-powered platform where you can sort of self-match based on what you tell us about yourself and your expectations about a nanny. We'll then suggest the best matches based on our proprietary algorithm, which is based on a lot of experience in researching that personality compatibility. All our nannies are vetted, and the list is super curated in that sense that it's only the nannies who are looking for jobs there. So it's a very efficient way of finding the right nanny. And if there are any problems, I'm more than happy to help personally. So they can find me on the contact information on the webpage.
That's fantastic. And I just want to say a big thank you, especially for you sharing so openly and honestly from a personal point of view, because we talked about the shame and guilt that's sometimes involved. And I know that can be challenging when you're running your own business. You've got a brand to protect, and you're also talking about being a mum and being a parent while conquering all that. So I really appreciate that.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And we'll chat again soon.